I mean, how often do you get to start with a rubber chicken on a podcast? Yeah. Oh,
In heart-centered practice, sometimes we have to say things that feel very uncomfortable and feel very silly and feel like they won't be received. And my mentor, Thea Elijah, she calls it a rubber chicken moment.
oh my God, that's awesome.
So
Oh man.
often when I'm on things like this, Andrea, I'm sitting with the rubber chicken in my lap and I'm squeezing. It's the rubber.
Oh, oh, that's so good. Oh man. Yeah. I oh shoot, I don't know what happened there. When I was first starting out with energy healing work, they taught us how to use surrogates, and I had this koala bear named Wally the koala, but a rubber chicken is way funnier. And that's it, right? We can lighten up. We can take life and ourselves a lot less seriously than we do. Yeah. Well, everybody, welcome to the Pure Light Project podcast. My name is Andrea Mai, and today my beautiful guest is Laura Rose Gage, and she and I met through her fantastic event that she and her partner sponsored called the Summit of Light. But today Laura and I are we're going to hang out and talk. We have so many things we can talk about. And one of those is storytelling and how we use it in our lives. And, whether you consider yourself a storyteller or not, you do have a story, and we are made of story upon story. The very reality that we experience is all story and imagination. So yeah, so let's get into it. Rubber chickens and all. Oh,
I think that in my industry, which is really Chinese medicine and healing arts, sometimes you hear story a lot in this negative way, like transform the stories, the cultural programming. And the past, I've recently just come into this realization of how little that serves me. I talk to my clients a bunch about how, like, what are these stories that you have that are holding you back? What are these conditional statements you have on your soul? However, stories that are rooted in truth, that are kind of like this original manifestation of divine, are invaluable tools for transformation, for healing, for alchemy, for everything. And so often now I spend a lot of time thinking about those kind of stories, not the stories that we're looking to get rid of.
yeah. The stories you want to develop moving forward versus the ones that you gotta, cover your eyes and peek back, yeah, that's awesome. A lot of what I've been focused on in my own like exploration over the last year, 2 years, is really like, how do we write the new story, the new way, without, I was just writing about it yesterday, like, I had heard somebody talk this week about, all literature, is based on tragedy for like the last 1,000 years, 2,000 years since, right? It comes out of tragedy and trauma and what we perceive as loss. And I'm like, but as we're all invited into this conversation now of changing and elevating, and what we used to think of as loss, maybe we don't anymore. So then where do we go? What's the beauty? And so for me, it's come down to, there are still challenges, right? But that doesn't mean it has to be connotated as bad. So what about you?
Every story we experience, every event we experience in our life is another opportunity to pivot to the divine. So one of someone once told me, it was probably Connor, my partner. in general, it's probably a conversation between the two of us. Um, like the only really good negative emotion is loss and grief. Good. And I remember going, nope, I think all of them are good. I think they're all opportunities to pivot. There's these incredible archetypal stories around anger. There's incredible stories around sadness and grief. And I think that separation got us in trouble a little bit. And by separation, it was almost like we developed a culture of not looking at those stories, of ignoring them. I'll tell you, the number one thing that blocks a woman's fertility in my practice is grief. Always, hands down. We immediately go into fairy tales and mythology that handles grief, because the dominator culture, the American culture that most of my clients are in, doesn't handle grief well. And so taking that as a powerful pivot towards the divine, a cultivation of faith, is how eventually most of my clients choose to view that loss. The only thing that keeps us stuck in the loss and the grief or the anger or the sadness is almost pushing away the emotion.
Sure.
And so that's why I'll start to use acupuncture points that have stories around loss and grief. Because if we can, it's so, because I agree with you, Andrea, we're coming up with a new story. The story that we came into this world with, the story that we thought was the story of the future, is no longer the story of the future.
Yeah. And we get to write it, and we don't know what it is yet.
Yeah.
Other than one person at a time. And maybe we start to collectively come together and create that new story,
And it's an interesting paradox, because I would say, as a mystic, sometimes it feels like we're creating that story, and other times it feels like I'm just remembering.
Yeah. 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 And I know, it's so interesting. I know for myself, I've been in what I call like the bardo or the limbo, the space in between what was and what feels like it's coming in, but really that bardo space is just what is. It's where I am right now. And there was immense grief, right? Individually and collectively. I mean, because there are elements of what has been that were so divinely inspired, so beautiful. Even the ones, well, there's a lot a person could say about that, but I think the thing that stood out for me very specifically about what you just said is that they were stuck in it. And it's not that we don't feel these things. We don't feel it in our body, in ourselves. It's when we clutch onto it, and we stay stuck there. And then, wow, right? You're seeing this like preventing people from birthing something new.
Right. So from the vitalistic standpoint of medicine, you can view the body as a waterfall. So it starts with the soul, it goes down into the mental, emotional body, and then the physical body. So everything can be addressed at the soul level. That's where it starts. That's the origin point.
Yeah.
By the time we're feeling things in our physical body, that's like God shaking us, going, "What are you doing? We've already talked about this up here." And in many ways, the language of the soul is story. There's a reason why humans have such a rich oral history, predating any written text. And I think that it, through story is how we capture that and alchemize what's going on a soul level and hopefully stop it before it gets down to a physical level. But what I say to everyone is by the time you're feeling things physically, it's been here for a little bit. You've been mixing it up for a little while now. And so this is why Chinese medicine is something called a science of symbols. Everything symbolize something else. So you have pain in the back of your knee. Gosh, that's probably related to your bladder, which the bladder is related to being able to see at the darkest time of night. So having clear vision in the worst times of history, frankly. So you see how we can make these connections. There is a reason why, as a population, we had a huge uptick in lung-related diseases when the pathological emotion, the lung in imbalance is
Mhm.
grief.
Yeah. Oh,
You
yeah.
most Chinese medicine practitioners went, "Yeah."
The
Like,
Yeah.
this is a chicken or egg issue. It's also totally paradoxical. It's one of those things where it doesn't feel comfortable to say it nor to hear it. But these physical things we experience have their root in a spiritual cause. In many ways, there was a reason, there always is a reason for what we're experiencing as a world, as a collective conscious. And we were working through some loss.
Yeah. Chicken or egg, rubber chicken?
Right. I know.
Yeah, it's fascinating too, actually, like, you know, the knee. When you were saying that, and what came to me, of course, is like energetically when I read someone, and I'm picking up on the knee, and I'm like, for me, well, I don't have a background in traditional Chinese medicine. For me, what has always come up is, okay, what are you afraid to move forward into? What is the thing that you are holding yourself in place around? And so it's yeah, these things, these body parts tell us, they give us hints and whispers, um, just like this morning when I was working on with my mouse too much, my body was like, oh, lay down and rest and get ready to talk to Laura. That's we've done enough. Um, so so you have used, this idea, worked with this idea of storytelling. And I heard you say it before, and I would love to explore that a little more, that sort of these archetypal sort of stories. Because honestly, I haven't had a conversation like that, um, certainly on the podcast, but probably really ever. So and as a writer who, has written a lot of fiction, and it was interesting to me. It stayed with me when you mentioned that a while back. And so I'd love to get into that.
I think, like Chinese medicine or the energetic body, how there's kind of this like universal symbolism, because I think knowing what the knee symbolizes, without having that background is totally what happens all the time. People intuitively know. And it's the same with archetypes. What I find is writers put it in. they're doing it because it's part of human existence. So the way that I use this is primarily Jungian, Carl Jung, psychologist,
Okay.
who is a funky guy who spent time in a tower, probably doing psychedelics, although we don't have confirmation of that. He was one of the first people to really explore a lot of this in the Western world. But one of the existential crises he had in his life was realizing that he was coming up with stuff that the Chinese and the Japanese had come up with 1,000 years earlier. And it's this huge crisis in his career where he goes, what is the point? And I think from that experience he had is where he came up with the theory that we take for granted, which is the collective unconscious. So Jungian psychology is about the archetypes that exist in our life. Mm-hmm. We are all telling a story. We can shift that story. And when you know the archetypes that are at play in your life, like the mother, the father, the queen, the king, the hermit, the witch, like we could, there's tons and tons of lists.
The maiden, the crone.
The crone, yes, yeah. All of these things. The wild woman. So because I work primarily with women, the wild archetype, which I think makes people really uncomfortable, is what I primarily work with, because the dominator culture we are in suppresses it. Hands down. And I want to distinguish here between that is true of men and women. Yeah. And we don't feel comfortable with the wild archetype because it feels dangerous. It feels unstable. It feels uncertain. It feels beyond category. It feels beyond any story that we know of. And if we start to talk about this, it sounds very familiar to what we are walking into as a future story.
Great groundlessness.
Yes.
And trust, intuition. Explain the wild archetype from your lens. What is it?
The wild archetype is unreserved faith that whatever you do that is in heart alignment for you is going to work for everyone else, which is a really tough place to be for a lot of women. Because a lot of women are front loading what everyone else needs first. Mm. We flip that on its head by saying, if you feed yourself first, everything else will follow. And I have complete faith that when I am the queen of my life, when I do exactly what I want to do, when I want to do it, that my 8-year-old daughter who depends on me is going to be fine. And actually better than fine. She will benefit the most by me being me in its most authentic source. Now, most of us in this culture feel super, super uncomfortable with that because it requires a ton of faith. Yeah. Am I doing the right thing here? But really, the wild archetype is about how when we stay in touch with the heart and the lower jiao, I think some people would call it like this sacral chakra, just depends. There's just this lovely little basement area right here that most women don't feel quite connected with. But
Yeah.
there's this there's that, and there's the heart. And so for me, this little area down here is the inner child.
Yeah.
We really try to encapsulate laughter and joy and that wildness of, I'm going to go climb trees now.
Yeah.
It bubbles up from the basement.
Ah,
The other problem with that, though, is all the trauma gets shut in the basement. Right? So, and then we have this inner adult. The problem with the inner adult is the moment we start to display that inner adult, our culture and our family puts a ton of stories about what an adult is.
yeah.
So I want to be clear about what I mean by inner adult. A 2-year-old has an inner adult. Every human has this inner adult where when you look at them, and you know this because a 2-year-old is incredibly competent at being your equal.
Oh, yeah. It's
That's the inner
brilliant.
adult. That is an inner adult that has no cultural story placed upon them.
What I've seen too and maybe I don't know if it goes along with how you're going to continue to explain this, but it's also where when a child is walking through the world with all these cares and worries as a 1-year-old, as a 2-year-old, and it's like, woof, baby, like
Mhm,
you shouldn't even have that for another 15, 20, 30 years, like that level, and they came in with something
mhm.
intense, to solve. I've only run into a few children who have like their inner adult was it came in and on the minute they arrived, but
Yeah.
so anyways, but go ahead and continue.
Yeah, that would be really fair to say about me. I have had more than one person say I was born 40. And I think it's delightful once you're an adult, after you work through some things. You kind of get forced into this like interesting, well, what I would say is once you're able to connect, the connection between the inner adult and the inner child is via the heart. But we have a lot of data throughout our lives to close down our heart. And so one of the difficult aspects of being here is to keep our heart open, uh, in order to maintain that connection. Now, the other way you could think about the inner child and the inner adult would be between the inner child and the higher self. Okay. So the reason why I say that is because, yes, that 2-year-old has an inner adult. Um, and instead of that inner adult being responsible, she's resourced. So the way I describe this is we are all sitting on our throne. Our throne is made of the stuff of divinity. So we're resourced. Where we feel the presence of source and God is at our back, the back of our heart.
Mhm.
Where we interact with the world is the front of our heart. When we're not resourced at the back of our heart, we fall forward flat on our face when we're interacting with the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
This is that there's there's an organ in Chinese medicine called the pericardium, which doesn't seem like that big of a deal in Western physiology, but it really is a big deal in Chinese medicine. And in many ways, we think about it as these tendrils that come out from our heart. And you can see how that would be maybe a negative thing for some people in their life because they are putting these tendrils around the person in front of them,
Mhm.
especially if they're not resourced in the back. If they are not aware of the resources they have, they're looking everywhere out here for them.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like as you're saying that, it's so beautiful. I'm having this just this visual of the people I've met throughout my life who just have, it's full, no matter what language they use, right? There's just this deep presence and peace and calm and wisdom inside of them. They're they're just, not sorry. I don't know why I said sorry. Airspace. When you can bring to mind, to your heart's mind, someone you've met like that, and know that it's available for you in all moments, like just the recognition, the memory. The space you don't want to leave.
Mm-hmm. When you meet those people, they're oriented. They're oriented to life. I'll tie it back in. The wild archetype understands almost viscerally what orientation is. So I am human. I live between heaven and earth. My heart is the pivot point. I am resourced at my back. I'm having so much flipping fun out the front. And I am safe. I am safe. When you orient to yourself, you really understand on a very visceral level that no matter what I do, no matter what action I take, no matter where I go, how I interact with people, I am safe because I am oriented in this world. My heart is turned towards source. I am respecting what the Sufis call the first marriage. Within us, there is the light of God. Put in whatever word you want.
Yeah.
And ourselves, a flower. And that first relationship is between the sun and the flower. It is very tempting to turn your flower towards other people's suns. The importance here is to maintain this, the flower and the sun. Have that. That's part of the orientation. And that's that. And I almost feel like it's called the wild archetype because it's people on the outside looking in. It doesn't feel that wild when you're experiencing it. When you are in that energy of wildness, you're like, I get it.
Yeah.
You know, when the tree is struck by lightning, what does it do?
Oh, well, it develops a scar or it dies, is what I've seen.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But it just is, and it accepts it.
Yeah.
The other way we would put this is the wolf that is struggling in winter knows that spring will come. There's no question.
Yeah.
I think humans have this delightful ability to question it. Sometimes we question if spring will come.
Yeah.
The animal in survival mode, the wild animal, doesn't question it.
Yeah.
It knows it will come, that there will be another side to it. And there's a general acceptance of death that is present. One of my favorite kind of definitions of death is from German New Medicine, which is Well, they just resolved a conflict, like a healing crisis, and their body didn't survive. And it's celebrated because you
Yeah.
resolved the conflict.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Yeah.
You know, and I think that in many ways, loss, grief is about really opening ourselves up to the possibility that leaving this life isn't the end.
Yeah. I've walked through most of my life. I experienced the loss, the death of people in my life
Mhm.
at a pretty early age, like a lot of them in a short time. And
Mm,
it was very typical initially of how I approached it, the way that society trains you to meet death, and to experience loss. Like, we are trained to experience loss in a particular way. And having gone through quite a bit of that, I was probably in that sort of 16 to early 20s range,
oof, yeah.
and man, I mean, it just, the veil for that, and the societal expectation of what it is was completely removed for me. It was gone. I've never had what is a typical, I guess, response to it since then, because my thing is, wonderful, you're on to your next adventure, that you've done what you came to do and be part of, whatever that is. I mean, I can go into many other layers of philosophy around that, but at the like easiest way for others to maybe hear me is
Mhm.
that. But and we can celebrate that, yeah. So I love this wild archetype. I hadn't heard it, but I feel it. It feels, and the interesting thing too, I think, is these story types, these character types, these archetypes that we can use maybe as a reference of, oh, I want to live into that. I want to embody that, if you're aware of them. Or this is just how I am, and everybody has turned me into, you know, a
Mm,
character or a caricature, right?
mhm,
Depending on how
mhm.
they see you, and it doesn't matter how they see you. Uh, but it's like, these things are not always fixed forever, right? So we may have that, we may fully embody this, and then there may be a time when we don't, and so we go between wild and maybe like hindered, closed up, whatever the other is. So what would you say would be the extreme opposite of that, as an archetype? What?
Oh, the wild archetype?
Yeah.
Mhm. Like, so alien to me right now. And I can't put a word to it. It's almost like it's unspoken. Do you know what I mean? So, so many of the fairy tales are about avoiding that. Because the opposite of this would be someone who is at the mercy of the cultural stories and expectations. Most of this is from this wonderful Jungian analyst, Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And she has a beautiful book called Women Who Run with Wolves. And I think that it is relevant to men and women, by the way. And because just it's universal.
Yeah.
The But there's so many stories in our fairy tales that are about this. Um, I'm thinking of the girl with the red shoes in particular, who becomes so obsessed with these beautiful leather patent red shoes. People might be familiar with this fairy tale, and it's not the sweet fairy tales that I'm talking about. It's the bad versions, the versions that are a little scary, where this little girl gives up her life in the wild. She was so poor that she made her own red shoes out of little scraps of cloth.
Mhm.
And then one day, a rich woman in a carriage rides up and says, "Do you want to come with me?" Well, here's your number one sign that something bad is, do you want to come with me and live in comfort and not starve and not, try to survive day to day? And of course, the little girl goes, "Yes, yes, I do." And immediately the first thing that happens is the woman says, "Your clothes are disgusting. These shoes are disgusting." And she takes them and she burns them. And it's this devastating event for the little girl. And then the woman takes her to go get nice clothes. And when they're at the clothes shop, she sees these red patent leather shoes. And she sneaks them in because the woman's like almost blind. And she wears them to church. And the woman figures out what's happening because everyone's whispering about this little girl who's worn red shoes to church.
Oh my. Oh.
And so the woman says, "You're not allowed to have these." And she puts them up, but the girl obsesses over them. She can see them up on the shelf. And she obsesses and she obsesses and she obsesses until she steals them and takes them down. But this time when she puts them on, she starts dancing and can't stop. And she can't get the shoes off. And the story of this is that the girl roams the countryside until she falls over dead. Or another version of the story is a man comes along and chops her feet off.
I don't recall this story tale.
Fairy tales.
Fairy tale.
I'm telling you, fairy tales, guys. If you want another gruesome one, look up Bluebeard. But in many ways, we have disconnected from the reason why we would tell these stories. That story in particular is found all through Europe, many, many different versions of it, all through Europe. And the way that when you really sit with that story, you think that little girl was longing for a time before when she had autonomy and she really actually valued surviving day to day, not being sure where her next meal would come from. And she was trapped in this expectation kind of place.
Yeah.
And she took the bait of ease and culture and modernity and then she spent the rest of her life, quote unquote, trying to get back to that with these red patent leather shoes. It turned out to not be such a good thing. Right. And so you can imagine being told this story as a warning.
Sure.
Right. So we hear fairy tales now and we go, "Oh, they're so gruesome and they're just fun and they're a children's story." Every single fairy tale has an archetypal truth to them. There's a reason why they exist through most of the world. We can see stories that are mirrored in Native American stories to European stories that all kind of have this same
Sure.
flavor, right?
Yeah.
So I tell the disturbing red shoes story just as an example of what happens when we give up our wildness.
Sure.
That little girl didn't know what was going to happen day to day. But is the safety and security of modernity worth being stuck in a gilded cage? For me, that's what that fairy tale means. I know someone else will read it and take an entirely different interpretation from it. This is what's fun about fairy tales.
Right. Right.
So I tell these stories, and the treatment room, right?
Yeah. It's so interesting because it brings me back to, you know, when I was heavily involved um, in Buddhist community,
Mm.
in Tibetan, sort of Western Tibetan type Buddhist communities, and some of the stories around like the bodhisattvas and the different Buddhas and how they would, you know, um, how they would go through their trials, basically, of waking up. It was the same thing, right? Build me a
Mhm.
house. Okay, now tear it all down. Build me a house again. Now tear it all down. On and on and on. You
Mhm.
know, the stories of sort of the temptations coming to you in the form. It could be a crippled, something about like old haggard women
It
or
always is.
or temptresses, right? It doesn't matter
Yeah.
what your story is. It's the woman's always a hag or a temptress, you know.
Mhm.
But and that, when we really meet that, this in the last 2 weeks, like really deeply, the story that's been coming up, which is very different for me, something I've sat with a long time and really deeply understood, like knew, was, something that was said a lot in uh back in like my meditation group days, right? If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. And this came out of Zen traditions. And I was like, I mean, I get it. Like, I got it, but like I got it. It the whole thing unleashed, is what is holding you back, what is holding you in place, this ideal, the things that we give our weight to, the stories we buy into that then cap us
Mhm.
to our own. I don't have the words for it quite yet, but the things we think we should believe in, this has the answer.
Mhm.
Even, like, if it's in your way, like really stopping you from the expansion, the unfolding of your full self, of your experience, you have to let it go. I mean, you don't have to, but you're going to end up, what'd you say earlier? It's like God rattling your body or something, right?
Yeah.
Like that's one of the things that can happen. It comes out sideways.
Mhm. Mhm. Yet this brings up the powerful point that I feel like I started with, which was just that stories are a tool. They're not the be end of all of this. That when I talk about the soul at the top of the waterfall, it's I am. So stories are many times the stories that we walk around with are a representation of a conditional statement we have on our existence. I am a good mother, therefore I am. I have a good husband, therefore I am. I am thin, therefore I am. I will never let down my children, therefore I am. These are way heavy on people and they don't know that they're there. And so these stories are a powerful tool to alchemize those statements we put on ourselves. Same as kill the Buddha, same thing. I am like the Buddha, therefore I am. And I'll tell you, this was driven home to me because postpartum with my daughter, I developed significant suicidal ideation, the most significant I had ever experienced. I mean, I was on the phone with the therapist. I was like, get me a bed. Like, I can't leave my daughter. It was very clear. Like, I can't leave my daughter, but I feel out of control.
Yeah.
Years later, in a conversation with a colleague, she said, "What do you think the purpose of that was for you?" And through the conversation, I realized that I had a conditional statement on my soul, which was, I will always be there for my daughter, therefore I am. What is a great way for your soul to trigger you to resolve that? Because our souls don't want these conditional statements. So they will conspire. Our higher selves will conspire to give us every opportunity to cast off those conditional statements. So what was better than me having a very significant time period of, I'm genuinely worried I'm going to kill myself, which is the ultimate way of leaving my daughter alone. It was showing the very painful point that I could never be for my daughter, and I could be there all the time for my daughter, and I could not have that be as a condition on my existence. So when you start to live in this paradigm, you start to really accept and understand everything that happens in your life is for your highest good, and I trust it.
Wow. Yeah. That trust. Oh, that is something we dip in and out of over
Mhm.
time. And then at some point, you think you trust, and I've not looked at it exactly like that, but I love that, like sort of conditional statements, conditional I am statements. And it's like, okay, how can I go a step further? How can I surrender that? And man, like you recognize, like you really are supported if you
Mhm.
just drop it.
Mhm.
But you won't. There's this, we love to like logic our way into things, and there's no logic to it in my experience. Some other
Mhm.
people might might find some logic. There's no logic in terms of the way we have been trained to think about things. Um, yeah. So you're going through uh mm, you're working, you're maybe into this place of finding out what's new and fresh, and what sort of stories you might have for yourself around taking leaps, right?
Mhm.
Anything coming up?
I used to joke that a couple years ago I was pulling the tower a lot, which I think is God basically pushing you off a cliff.
And the tower is the
It's
tower
a
card.
tarot card.
Tarot card. Yeah, that's what I
Tarot
thought.
card.
But yeah.
So the tower is a tarot card, which is usually getting struck by lightning, or a tree getting struck by lightning.
Yeah.
And pretty much for me, it symbolizes stuff is going to happen. I'm going to push you off the cliff and you're going to have to figure it out. Right now, I'm in a season of leaping, which is like pulling the archetype. Tarot has a ton of archetype in it. So the Fool, which is you don't know any better and you jump off because it's effing fun.
Yeah. I.e., you're 19 years old,
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which for me, because I was born 40, I never really experienced, by the way. So I would just say
Uh-huh.
that, like, I'm in this weird season of, oh, yeah, this,
Wow. Yeah.
you know? And so, um, and I think all of us are in this season of really talking about, I think for a long, long time, I was an acupuncturist who incognito was doing this work Without really telling people, I'm actually putting this point in to make a major life change for you
Eh,
that you will trigger in yourself. Like the joke around the office about Laura is my divorce and marriage rate among my patients. Because someone will come in thinking something and dragging their feet about it, and then they will take the leap.
Yeah.
And that's the power of these stories. And for a long time, I felt real bad about that track record.
Nothing to feel bad about. You
Exactly. Yeah,
you can't do their homework for them. They can't do yours, and you can't make those changes happen for them.
right.
You know.
Exactly. I think that the work we do is we're conduits. We're a mirror. We're here to hold up a mirror. And when people release the veils, the stories that are not in service to them. So there's stories that are in service to you, and there's stories that are not in service. And all we can do as people who are, I happen to be the light shining through a human body called Laura, is all we can do is hold up that mirror and invite them.
Yeah. It makes me think of, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Not like thinking, but it pops up a lot. I can't remember. It wasn't Clockwork Orange, or maybe it was
Mm.
the book where the characters become the books because books are banned. So each of these people takes on the story and memorizes
Mhm.
it and
Mhm.
like lives it. And
Yeah.
um that's it's funny how that it just keeps unfolding. Like I read that years ago and watched the movie years ago, and it's like, oh, yeah, man, I'm this. And what beauty, the other side of that, what beauty is that the character that we are, the being, the lens, the all that we are, the divine, like we are created, we were created, however that creation came to be. And everybody's got a different interpretation of that, but however it is, we were created as we are
Mhm.
for spirit to come through, or nature, or whatever you want to call that, right? For it to come through and see through our eyes, taste through our tongue, feel the cheek against another cheek with this cheek, right? It wanted to feel and experience through us on one level.
Mhm.
you know, as you, I'm going to pull this down here. And hopefully, okay, I'm not going to pull it down. Basically, I've told this story one other time, but when I left my job in 2019, I had spent most of my family were self-employed, and I'd spent my whole life kind of feeling like I'd missed the mark somehow. And so this
Mhm.
was 2019. I was, I don't know, 47, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. And I'd been planning it for all my adult life. I'd been planning to go out on my own. And we were walking, my wife was picking up something at a craft store, and I walk through, and she does cross stitch, and we're walking through the cross stitch section, and I see this pattern, and I stood there and I just immediately started sobbing. Like there was no
Mhm.
thinking. I just started bawling. And it's so simple. It's just, she took a leap of faith and grew her wings on the way down. And I am not
Mhm.
like the kind of person who would normally, but it struck me. And that piece has been unfolding for me just every day, you know, like really understanding what that means. Um, and that after spending years in the Shambhala tradition and the idea of the Garuda, who never even has felt ground, you know, born in the air never has known ground, right?
Yeah.
So all of these stories that come in to our stories, and how we identify and feel about ourselves, and which ones no longer work. So
That phrase for me, that idea has manifested as the path will rise to meet me. It makes me think of stepping out and there's no path, but you're still okay. You just know it will happen. It's like walking on clouds or something. Or Indiana Jones, where you realize that there's actually a path there. That's what I think too.
The one time I put on one of those, I don't like them, but those virtual reality like goggles, and there was this game, and it's literally like elevator door opens and you can step out. And every time my body would physically like have this reaction, like I would almost pass out, right? like there's nothing there. I can't step out, but in reality we can, it's not quite that, because there's always something we can see or sense or feel about the next step.
I agree. I think so often people are pushed off the cliff through events. They're pushed off the tower. And there comes a point in many people's path where they have to choose. They have to choose to do this. And there is incredible change at your fingertips, the ability to alchemize, the ability to completely transform your life. And often we wait for the bad thing to happen to create that transformation. I would say for me, suicidal ideation was the bad thing. That was God shaking me pretty hard, being like, figure it out. And I know that we're embarking on a time period where my question to most people is, why wait? It's there already. You can do it now. I promise. And it's actually a little easier. And healing happens. Healing happens. You don't have to work at it. You can just be open to it. For me, the biggest piece of faith was saying to source, to God, to light. It's a Sufi thing to breathe. You breathe in, you say, open me, Lord, and let me flow on the breath out. Open me. And my favorite name of God is Fatah, which is the opener. And the idea of this is open me even more, shine light on things I didn't even know existed. Let it be the way it is. Open me even more. Can I be broken open even more? And by extension, the key to this is the faith that the healing will happen, that you don't have to work at it, that humans do this already. We're capable of it without trying. In fact, sometimes we muck it up when we try too hard.
Yeah, that's a big one. When your identity and your labels are wrapped around the thing you perceived as broken, and you just that it's the identity piece, but it can be as quick as ripping off the Band-Aid. You just have to be willing to there's so many layers, because when you develop an identity around your broken, what you perceive as brokenness or as unwhole or needing healing, you know, and this could be physical, it could be mental, it
Mhm.
could be emotional, it could be many things, right?
Mhm. Mm.
When
Here's
you
the
develop that identity, it's oh, the other question to bring in that I've found I had to work with, and that I've worked with so many people, is, you know, we think, well, what will they think, where
Mhm.
they are, right? um and that could, it could also be good or bad. So all these layers, right? What will they think? Oh, if I'm too wild, if I'm too free, or what
Mhm.
will they think, you know, if I knew somebody whose daughter was had very, very serious health issues, and their
Mhm.
financial state was bound into receiving, because of the daughter's financial status, and
Mhm.
the mother staying stuck because the terror of what next, right? And that's a very painful place.
Mhm.
We do these things to ourselves, you know.
Absolutely. And I think, I guess the caveat that I put onto this is that healing can be slow and painful and difficult to do if you don't first have love at 51%. This is this is totally a thing from my mentor where she's like, the healing isn't going to happen unless the love is at 51%. So all that we need to do, our only focus is on getting the love to 51%, you know, like opening up our heart enough to receive the love.
Yeah.
You don't have to create it. You just have to trust that you're not going to get hurt if you open it up. So cultivating to 51%. Then it's like a tumble. And if you're not at 51%, it is totally okay to pull back and go, okay, I'm going to wait a little while and get it up here, you know? And so we are divine light shining through the stained glass window of ourselves. And when I say 51%, it's like cleaning off those windows to let more light shine through.
Mm.
That first step, that first leap is the hardest. Then it gets easy. Promise. Really promise. It does get easier.
Then you're like, well, why did I wait so long?
That is how it always is, right? You go through the doorway and you look
Oh my
back and you're
goodness.
like, how many times did I have conversations with you about how hard this was? And I go, I know,
Uh,
it's okay.
oh man. Well, I'm glad that you came on today.
I'm so
And
grateful to be here. Thank you.
yeah, good stuff. So where would, if people want to connect with you, where do they do that?
So you can connect with me personally at laurarosegage.com, and pretty much all social media at Laura Rose Gage. And I really do invite people to come to the Summit of Light, so summitoflight.com, and check out all the wonderful people who we have on there, all our fantastic speakers. I think there is incredible inspiration there from a wide variety of topics.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, yeah. The Summit of Light was inspiring to be part of, to meet and play and have just rich conversation and see the different points, the different
Mhm.
stars in the sky, you know. So yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. All right, Laura Rose Gage, thank you for shining your light with us
Thank
today.
you. It's so
And we
good to
will
see you.
go ahead.
It was so good to see you, and I just thank everyone who's here.
Awesome. All right. Well, check out the Summit of Light. Connect with Laura if you want to play more with her and go into some of the things she's offering. And otherwise, we will be back again when we are back. And if you like this video or this podcast, if you're listening to it, be sure to like it and share it with somebody who might benefit from the conversation. So otherwise, keep shining. We love you.
Hmm.